I wish I could sit here and tell you that my marriage was picture perfect, that after 12 years together, Rachel and I were still that annoyingly blissful couple you see in the movies, the ones who make you believe in soulmates and fairy tale endings. Maybe that's how it appeared from the outside looking in. 2 kids, a charming house, family dinners every Sunday. But anyone who has been married long enough understands that reality is rarely as straightforward as it seems, and things can shift in an instant. For me, it all began with subtle signs, like whispers carried by the wind, just the sort of things you might dismiss as normal. Until, of course, they weren't. Around 8 months ago, I started to feel something. Initially, I brushed it off, thinking it was all in my imagination. I mean, I'd never considered myself the jealous type, and I trusted Rachel, or at least I thought I did. But hell, she started transforming right before my eyes. Rachel had always been a creature of habit. She thrived on her routines. Mondays were for Pilates, Wednesdays meant book club, and Fridays were reserved for our movie nights after the kids were tucked in. But suddenly, those routines began to shift. She started going out more frequently, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, always with a ready-made excuse. She'd say things like, "Oh, I'm meeting the girls from yoga," or "We're doing a late-night run at the gym." I wanted to believe her, truly. Yet, there was something in her gaze, perhaps excitement or guilt, that made it hard to accept. I vividly recall one occasion when she returned home from one of those girls' nights, and I swear, it felt like a different woman walked through the door. There was a look of satisfaction on her face, as if she'd just experienced the best night of her life. All I could think was, what the hell did I miss? She'd become distant and cold, barely uttering a word to me or the kids. If I inquired about her evening, she'd brush me off with a lackluster, "It was fine," before heading straight for the shower. Then she'd lock herself in the bathroom for what felt like an eternity. I'd never considered myself a snoop, but in those moments, the paranoia began to creep in like an itch I couldn't scratch. And then there was her phone. Oh man, where do I even begin with that? It was practically glued to her hand, as if it held the secrets of the universe. Even while cooking dinner, it would sit there on the counter, screen down, buzzing incessantly. I knew something was off when one day she received a message, and her entire demeanor shifted, like she'd been caught red-handed, and she deleted it so quickly I barely had time to process what had just happened. I asked, "Who was that?" trying to keep my tone casual, but she just laughed it off. "Oh, nobody. Just spam," she replied, her voice too high-pitched and forced. I decided to let it slide for that night anyway. I know what you're probably thinking. If I was so suspicious, why didn't I confront her? But you've got to understand, when you've shared your life with someone for so long, it's tough to just flip a switch and assume the worst. Rachel and I had a history, a good history. We weren't merely husband and wife. We were partners, best friends. Or at least, that's what I thought. So, like any loving husband aiming to salvage his marriage, I attempted to mend things. I figured maybe we were stuck in a rut, perhaps she was just overwhelmed with work, or maybe this was one of those phases couples go through. I decided to plan a surprise weekend getaway, just the 2 of us. I even contacted her boss to ensure she could take Friday off, booked a cozy little cabin in the mountains, and arranged for a babysitter to look after the kids. I was excited, eager to whisk her away and reignite whatever flame had dimmed. But when I broke the news to her, she didn't display happiness, surprise, or any of the emotions I'd hoped for. Instead, she looked annoyed. "I can't," she said, barely making eye contact. "Work is crazy right now. I have to be in the office all weekend." My heart plummeted. It wasn't just her words. It was how effortlessly they rolled off her tongue, like she didn't even need to think about the lie. She didn't even bother pretending to be disappointed. That night, I found myself sitting on the couch after she went to bed, staring at the blank TV screen, my mind racing. I replayed every moment of our marriage in my head, trying to pinpoint when everything had started to go downhill. And the most frustrating part? I couldn't figure it out. All I knew was that my wife, the woman I thought I'd share my life with, was slipping away, and I had no clue how to bring her back. By that point, the tension between us had escalated. She became defensive over the smallest inquiries. If I asked what time she'd be home, she'd snap back, "Why? Do you need to control every second of my life?" We began arguing more frequently, But these weren't the usual squabbles about leaving dishes out or forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning. Oh no, these were full-blown fights, complete with yelling and slammed doors. And afterward, I'd sit there feeling like the villain, like maybe I was the one losing my mind. The worst part about suspicion? It seeps into every aspect of your life, like a toxic poison. The more I allowed it to consume me, the more I felt like a stranger in my own existence. Every good morning felt phony. Every kiss before bed felt forced. I tried my best to hold it all together, but it felt like attempting to prevent an avalanche. Eventually, I cracked, but not in the way you might expect. One evening, I found myself sitting there, watching Rachel scroll through her phone, that same sly smile dancing on her lips, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I needed to confide in someone who would give me the unvarnished truth. No sugarcoating, no nonsense. That's when I decided to reach out to Samantha. She was one of Rachel's closest friends, but she'd also been woven into the fabric of our lives since the early days of our marriage. If anyone could help me figure out whether I was losing my mind, it was her. Samantha and I met up at a cozy little coffee shop. The type of place that was just loud enough to drown out serious discussions, but still quiet enough to hear yourself think. I was a bundle of nerves, and I'm sure she noticed. I mean, what kind of husband sits down with his wife's best friend and says, "Hey, I think my wife's cheating on me"? It felt absurd. But as soon as those words left my lips, the shock in Samantha's eyes made me think that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely delusional. "Daniel, are you certain? Rachel? She's always been so devoted, you know? She loves you and the kids. I've never seen her act like this. It just doesn't sound like her." That was Samantha's first reaction. Disbelief, perhaps even a hint of denial. And I couldn't blame her. Hell, I didn't want to believe it either. But as we continued talking, I began to spill everything. The strange nights out, the deleted texts, her sudden outbursts. By the time I finished, Samantha sat there, biting her lip, looking like she'd just been let in on a devastating secret. "All right," she finally said, leaning in closer, as if we were sharing classified information. "I don't want to make you paranoid, but I have noticed some changes. She's been different lately, you know, more distant." She glanced down at her cup, stirring her coffee as if it held all the answers. "But if we're going to get to the bottom of this, we need evidence. Real evidence." That's when Samantha suggested the unthinkable, a GPS tracker. My stomach lurched just hearing those words. I mean, who does that? It felt like a betrayal, like admitting my marriage was truly in a dire state. But deep down, I understood that I couldn't continue living in this fog of uncertainty, torturing myself with endless what-ifs. So, reluctantly, I agreed. That night, we discreetly placed the tracker in the glove compartment of Rachel's car, hidden where she'd never think to look. Those next few weeks, they turned out to be the longest of my life. Every day, I'd open the tracker app on my phone, watching those little red dots appear on the map, tracing her movements like I was some kind of detective. And let me tell you, it was utterly draining. I'd watch her drive to work in the morning. Everything seemed normal, nothing unusual. And then in the evening, that's when things got chaotic. She'd disappear off the grid, making random stops in unfamiliar neighborhoods, and occasionally she'd park at seedy motels for hours. Hours! Every time I saw that red dot come to a halt outside a motel, my heart would plummet. What on earth was she doing there? Who was she meeting? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was visiting a friend. Perhaps there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But as the days passed and the pattern became clearer, I knew I was running out of excuses. Samantha checked in on me every few days, asking if I'd discovered anything, and I'd recount what I'd seen, each time feeling more nauseous than the last. I even started driving by some of those locations myself, desperate to catch a glimpse of whatever was unfolding. There was one day in particular that I'll never forget. Following the tracker's route, I located Rachel's car parked in the lot of this cheap, seedy motel on the outskirts of town. It was one of those places you only go if you're out of options, screaming a fare from every corner. I parked a few spaces away, keeping my distance. My hands trembled so badly I could hardly steady my phone, but I managed to snap a few photos of her car. For a while, I just sat there, fixated on the motel entrance, waiting, hoping to see her walk out alone. But she never did. After about an hour, I drove off, feeling like the biggest fool on the planet. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just in my head. This wasn't mere paranoia. Something was fundamentally wrong. Back at home, the atmosphere was tense. I couldn't look at Rachel the same way anymore. Every time she laughed or smiled, it felt insincere, like a facade she wore to mask whatever was really happening. And she knew something was off with me too. How could she not? I'd snap at her over trivial matters, picking fights just to gauge her reaction. But rather than calming my suspicions, it only drove us further apart. Then one day, the tracker led me to a place that was all too familiar, a restaurant we used to frequent when we first started dating. I watched the little red dot move across my screen, my heart racing, and sure enough, it stopped in the parking lot. I jumped in my car and sped over, desperate to catch her in the act. But by the time I arrived, her car had vanished, as if she'd evaporated into thin air. I sat in that parking lot, staring at the empty space where she'd parked, feeling like the world's biggest idiot. That night, I decided to spill everything to Samantha. "I can't take this anymore," I murmured, my voice barely audible over the phone. "I know she's hiding something from me." "Daniel, you have to stay strong," Samantha urged. "Things are going to get messy before they get better, but you deserve the truth." And she was right. I couldn't confront Rachel just yet, not without solid proof in hand. So, I immersed myself in the GPS logs, desperately trying to connect the dots of her whereabouts, hunting for patterns and frequent spots she visited. Each time I discovered one of those mystery locations, I'd drive over, snap photos, and document everything meticulously. It felt like I was assembling a case against my own wife, preparing for some courtroom drama. Nights turned into exhausting hours spent glued to my laptop, poring over maps and logs like a detective on a relentless case. The more I uncovered, the closer I got to a truth I was terrified to confront, but one I knew was looming. There comes a moment when your gut screams that something is terribly wrong, and you just know, if you don't discover the truth right then, it'll gnaw away at you until there's nothing left. That moment crashed over me one evening when I had reached my breaking point with the endless GPS logs and blurry motel photos. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to see her. I waited until she left that night. She gave me some lame excuse about meeting a friend for drinks, which felt so uninspired that I was weary of pretending to believe her lies. I nodded and watched her walk out the door, feigning ignorance like a clueless husband who had no idea what his wife was truly up to. The second she drove off, I was in my car, following at a distance, headlights off, trying to blend into the shadows. It didn't take long for her to arrive at a small, dingy bar, a dive where you go to drown your sorrows, not catch up with friends. I parked a few cars down, close enough to watch, but far enough not to draw attention. And then I saw him. This guy, tall, scruffy-looking, probably in his mid-30s, strolled up to Rachel like they had been waiting for this moment all day. The way her face lit up when she saw him, it was a smile I hadn't seen in years. I watched as they embraced, holding onto each other just a bit too long, then settled into a table in the corner, all cozy and intimate. My entire body turned numb. My wife, my Rachel, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, was sitting there with this stranger, laughing, leaning in close, whispering secrets that belonged only to them. Every laugh, every touch felt like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. I wanted to storm in there, flip the table over, and demand to know who the hell he was and what she thought she was doing. But I was frozen in place, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures, struggling to keep the camera steady as my hands shook like a leaf in a storm. It felt surreal, watching the life I thought I had fall apart right before my eyes, and all I could do was sit there and witness it unfold. A part of me held on to the hope that maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe there was some innocent explanation waiting to be revealed. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had known for months. After about an hour, they left the bar together, strolling out like they owned the night. I followed them for a bit, desperate to see where they were headed, hoping to catch a glimpse of something more definitive, but they eventually split up. I drove home in silence, my mind racing, replaying every detail of what I'd witnessed. I knew I could no longer keep this bottled up. I had to confront her. I needed to hear her side of the story, no matter how many lies she would weave. When she walked through the door, I was waiting in the living room, my heart pounding like a drum. "How was your night?" I asked, forcing myself to sound calm. "Fine," she replied, barely glancing my way as she tossed her bag onto the couch and headed toward the kitchen. "Who was the guy?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, like it was just a passing thought, even though it felt monumental. She froze, her back turned to me, and for a brief moment, I thought I detected panic in her eyes. But when she turned around, she wore a mask of calm. "What guy?" she asked, pretending to be clueless, like she didn't have a clue what I was talking about. "Cut the act, Rachel," I said, rising to my feet, my voice rising despite my best attempts to stay composed. "I saw you tonight. With that guy. Lucas, or whatever his name is. I witnessed it all." She rolled her eyes, and the look on her face, like I was the ridiculous one, sent my blood boiling. "Lucas is just a friend," she retorted, crossing her arms defensively. "He's having a tough time, and we were just catching up." Jesus. Daniel, are you seriously tailing me now? What the hell is wrong with you? "What's wrong with me?" I shouted, feeling my composure unraveling. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and you expect me to just sit here and act like nothing's wrong? I saw how you were with him, Rachel. That's not just a friend." She shook her head and laughed. Actually laughed, as if the whole situation were some sort of joke. "Oh, come on. You're overreacting. I can't have friends without you going off the rails. Maybe if you weren't so controlling all the time, I wouldn't have to go out just to escape from you." That's when the fights erupted. Big, messy screaming matches where no topic was off limits. All the pent-up frustrations and buried resentments we had accumulated over the years exploded like a thunderstorm. It didn't matter what we argued about, money, the kids, work, it always circled back to the same point. I would accuse her of cheating, and she'd flip the script, claiming I was suffocating her, playing the victim as if she were the one wronged. It was infuriating, and I felt like I was losing my sanity, getting dragged into her twisted game where right was wrong and up was down. Despite everything, she refused to admit anything. "You're crazy," she would insist. "Paranoid. You just want to control me." She was a master at feigning innocence, pretending to be the one under attack. After each blow-up, she'd act as if nothing had happened, as if we hadn't just laid our souls bare. But I couldn't let it slide. I knew Lucas wasn't just a friend, and I sensed there were even more secrets lurking in the shadows. So I took matters into my own hands. I hired a private investigator. I needed someone who could uncover the truth, dig where I couldn't, and find whatever skeletons Rachel had hidden away. As much as it pained me to do it, I realized it was the only way to get the answers I desperately needed. The guy I hired was your typical old-school PI, the kind you'd expect to see in those noir detective films. Trench coat, thick mustache, and a no-nonsense demeanor. He was direct with me, warning not to expect miracles, but promised he would uncover what he could. It felt surreal, hiring a stranger to spy on my wife like something out of a bad film. But by that point, I had crossed so many lines that one more didn't seem to matter. The first week passed without incident. Just her usual routine, nothing that screamed affair. But then the reports began trickling in. Photos, timestamps, locations. Rachel meeting up with Lucas at various bars and restaurants, sitting close, holding hands when they thought no one was watching. And then other men, names I'd never heard before, faces that twisted my stomach into knots. The more evidence the PI gathered, the more I realized Lucas wasn't the only player in this twisted game. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was leading a double life, one I had been completely oblivious to for far too long. Each new piece of evidence felt like another nail, sealing the coffin of our marriage. The hardest part was maintaining the facade, pretending I didn't know anything, that everything was fine. I would sit across from her at dinner, watching her smile at the kids, and all I could think about was who she was going to meet once they were tucked in. It felt like living with a stranger, and each day the chasm between us widened. When I hired the PI, I thought I was prepared to confront the truth, ugly as it might be. I expected there would be some affair, perhaps a fling that spiraled out of control, but what came back at me like a freight train. Lucas was merely the beginning of something much larger, and it didn't take long for the pieces to unravel. Every few days, The PI sent updates. Photos, texts, locations she'd been to. The blows just kept coming. It turned out my wife was meeting more than just one man. There were others. One young enough to be mistaken for a college student, and another much older, well-dressed, like some high-powered executive. The nature of her interactions with each of them varied. Intimate, flirtatious, sometimes downright romantic. She had morphed into a different person with each guy, as if she was donning a new mask every night. Then came the bombshell, a dating profile. The PI discovered her on an exclusive app designed for secret hookups. She had crafted an entirely new identity, calling herself Lana, with photos I'd never seen before, showcasing outfits that were a far cry from what she wore around me. Her profile read like someone I didn't even recognize. Adventurous, seeking excitement, no strings attached. The realization struck me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a mere mistake. This was the woman she had chosen to become. But the PI didn't stop there. He uncovered information about private parties, secret gatherings I was completely unaware of. And then came the name that turned my stomach, James. I'd met James before, back when he worked with Rachel. We'd shared drinks, grilled steaks in my backyard. To me, he was just another face from the office, another work friend. But now, he was something far more sinister. Like clockwork, every Thursday night, she would meet him, and it wasn't for business discussions. I tried to ask around, close friends, anyone who might have some insight, but the silence was deafening. Nobody wanted to talk, and that only intensified my feelings of isolation, like I was the last person to know about this sick joke of a double life my wife was leading. People would avoid eye contact, dodge my questions as if they'd all been rehearsed. Meanwhile, Rachel continued on as if nothing was amiss. She laughed over dinner, tucked our kids into bed, as if she weren't concealing a mountain of lies. She seemed happier than ever, as if some weight had lifted from her shoulders. It was infuriating to witness, watching her live so freely while I struggled just to get through each day. Nights were the worst. I was tormented, unable to shake off the images of her with other men, laughing, touching, and who knows what else. I had to keep up the pretense, at least until I gathered everything I needed. I kept the private investigator on retainer, diligently collecting more proof. I wanted to confront her with all the evidence in one explosive revelation, leaving no room for denial. This wasn't just about Lucas. It encompassed everything. The men, the parties, the web of lies. That moment of reckoning was drawing near, and I was ready to dismantle her double life, to expose the woman she had become. However, I didn't anticipate the final twist that would change everything and blow this entire charade wide open. The night I decided to confront Rachel was one I had meticulously prepared for over weeks. The PI had delivered. I had amassed all the evidence, photos, messages, everything to unveil her deceit. I was ready to confront her, eager to see her expression when she realized there would be no escaping this time. But life has a knack for throwing curveballs when you least expect it. Just as I was about to execute my plan, I received a call from the investigator that sent a chill through my veins. He informed me that Lucas had just been diagnosed as HIV positive. It felt as if the world had come to a screeching halt. All those nights Rachel had come home late, all those excuses about meeting friends, all those times she'd slipped into bed next to me without a word. Everything crashed down on me in one sickening wave. My hands trembled, and my voice broke as I spoke to the investigator, desperately trying to grasp what this meant for me, for our family. If Lucas had HIV, what did that imply for Rachel? And what about me? There was no time for fear. I had to act. I drove home like a man possessed, ignoring traffic signals and speeding through intersections. I needed answers, immediate answers. When I burst through the front door, Rachel was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if it were just another ordinary evening. She didn't even look up at first, and that only intensified my fury. "Get in the car," I snapped, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you talking about?" She frowned, her confusion apparent. "What's going on?" I said, "Get in the damn car." I wasn't in the mood for games, and she could see that in my eyes. After a tense standoff, she begrudgingly followed me outside. I could feel her anger radiating off her, but I didn't care. This wasn't about her feelings anymore. This was about the truth, and I was determined to drag it into the light, no matter her objections. The ride to the clinic was thick with tension, silence stretching between us like a taut wire. She kept glancing at me, her eyes a mix of confusion and fear, but I maintained my focus on the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that I felt the blood rushing to my knuckles. Upon our arrival, I confronted her bluntly. "You need to take an HIV test. Right now." I scrutinized her expression, searching for any sign of guilt or panic. But instead, she looked infuriated, as though I had leveled the most outrageous accusation against her. "You've lost it," she snapped. "Why would I need an HIV test? You're the one acting paranoid and controlling. For all I know, it's you who's been unfaithful." "Stop playing games with me, Rachel," I growled, my patience wearing thin. "Lucas has HIV. You know exactly who I'm talking about. Now get tested." She didn't resist any further. Perhaps she recognized the futility of denying it. Maybe she was just scared of what the outcome would reveal. But when the test results came back, it was precisely what I dreaded. She was positive, HIV positive. My wife, the woman who had orchestrated this double life behind my back, had been exposed to a virus that could alter both our lives forever. That's when all hell broke loose. She attempted to shift the blame onto me, claiming I must have brought it home. She accused me of fabricating stories, of trying to destroy her life for no reason at all. It was as if a switch had flipped within her. The woman I once knew vanished, replaced by someone willing to say anything to evade accountability. "Maybe if you weren't so dull," she spat at one point. "Maybe if you actually cared about my needs, this wouldn't have happened. But no, all you do is watch me, follow me, smother me. Is it any wonder I sought more?" Those words pierced through me like daggers. But I refused to let her off the hook. I laid everything bare, the evidence, the affairs, the dating profile. As I spoke, I could see the dawning realization in her eyes, that she was backed into a corner and had no way to wriggle out. The anger that had once fueled her shifted to fear. But it wasn't the kind of fear you might expect. It was fear for herself, for the chaos she had wrought, the life she had willingly discarded. Then she tried to suppress the truth. "Please, Daniel," she begged, grasping my arm tightly. "We don't have to tell anyone. No one needs to know. I can manage this. I'll get treatment. Just please don't make this worse." I could barely face her. "Worse?" I said, bitterness creeping into my tone. "You think it can't get any worse than this?" But hiding wasn't an option. I knew it, and deep down she did too. If she was HIV positive, then the men she had been with, the men who had wives and families, needed to know the truth. They all deserved it, no matter how brutal it might be. So I did what I had to do. I reached out to those I could find, contacted the wives, and carefully laid everything out. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, informing these women that their husbands, men they loved and trusted, had been sleeping with my wife and could potentially be infected. The fallout was swift and brutal. Lives were shattered, mine included. I can still hear one woman breaking down on the phone, her voice trembling as she thanked me for revealing the truth, even though it was a truth that would dismantle her entire world. With every call and every conversation, the weight of Rachel's betrayals grew heavier, more monstrous. She hadn't just shattered our family. She dragged others into her chaos, leaving a trail of destruction behind her. Our home transformed into a battlefield. I couldn't stand to look at her, and she refused to accept any responsibility. It became a relentless cycle, her denying, blaming, deflecting, and me grappling with how my life had derailed so dramatically. No one ever really prepares for the moment when you confront the person who has shattered your reality. You envision how it will unfold, the words you'll say, the anger you'll unleash, but when that moment finally arrives, it rarely goes as planned. I gathered all the evidence, laid it out in front of Rachel like a prosecutor presenting a case, convinced she would crumble, apologize, perhaps even beg for forgiveness. But no, that wasn't how it unfolded. Instead, it erupted into a full-blown war, one last desperate attempt by Rachel to salvage her pride. She stood there, eyes glued to the photos, messages, and tracking logs I had amassed. I watched the color drain from her face as the lies she had spun began to unravel. Yet even then, she searched for some flimsy excuse. But there was no escaping this time. "What do you have to say for yourself?" I demanded, my voice steady but laced with venom. "I know everything, Rachel. All of it. You can't lie your way out of this." For a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of genuine fear in her eyes. But just as quickly, she flipped the switch. "So, this is what you've been up to? Spying on me? Following me around like some obsessed lunatic? No wonder I couldn't stand to be around you." Her voice rose to a shriek, her words sharp as daggers. It was the same tired game: deflect blame and turn everything back on me. "Are you seriously blaming me right now?" I shouted, the frustration boiling over. "After all the lies, all the infidelity, you're going to stand there and act like you're the victim? What did you expect, Daniel?" she shot back. "You're boring, you never listen, and all you care about is work, work, work. Maybe if you'd paid attention to me, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." It felt like she was pouring gasoline on a fire that was already raging. My hands shook with rage as I pointed to the evidence. "This isn't just looking elsewhere, Rachel. This is an entire second life. You've lied to me. You've lied to our children. You've destroyed everything. And you expect me to believe it's my fault?" She paced the room, raking her hands through her hair, looking like a trapped animal. And then came the threats. "You want to ruin my life? Fine, I'll ruin yours too," she hissed. "I'll take the kids, the house, everything. You'll have nothing left when I'm done with you. You think you can just walk away from this? Think again." In that moment, I realized there was nothing left to salvage. Any love, any respect, any hope that she might show even a hint of remorse was gone. What remained was raw anger, bitterness, and a fierce resolve to move forward without her. "You can try to take everything," I told her, "but I'm done playing your games." And just like that, it was over. No more screaming, no more pleading. Only silence. Cold, suffocating silence that filled every corner of the house we once called home. That's when Samantha stepped in. She became my anchor during this tumultuous storm. I never imagined that Rachel's best friend would turn out to be my greatest ally, but Samantha was there for me, helping me navigate the divorce proceedings and sorting out the legalities. She wasn't just a friend, she was a lifeline. While Rachel clung desperately to her old life, spiraling further into denial and despair, Samantha kept me grounded, ensuring I stayed focused when everything felt overwhelming. The divorce process was grueling, far messier than I had ever anticipated. Rachel fought tooth and nail for everything: the house, custody, the bank accounts. But every time she swung, I was ready to counter. I knew her tactics, how she twisted the truth, and I made sure my lawyer was prepared for every underhanded move she attempted. And as much as she despised it, she knew I held all the cards: the truth, the evidence, the entire sordid narrative. In the end, she didn't get to walk away with the life she had envisioned. Gradually, the dust began to settle. Once the divorce was finalized, I moved out, leaving behind a house full of memories, some good, some bad, but all now tainted by what I had uncovered. I found a new place, smaller but comfortable, and I began to refocus on what truly mattered: my kids, my work, and rebuilding the pieces of my life that Rachel had shattered. At first, it felt like trudging through quicksand. There were days I would wake up and just sit there, staring blankly at the walls, bewildered by how everything had spiraled out of control. But then I thought of the kids, how they needed me to be strong, how they deserved a father who wasn't broken by this mess. Slowly, I started to reclaim myself. I began to go out more, reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I had neglected while being the perfect husband. It wasn't easy. It's never simple to look back and realize the person you loved, the person you shared your life with, was never who you thought they were. But the further I distanced myself from the wreckage of that marriage, the more I realized that not everything was bleak. I had been given a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to discover who I was without Rachel's shadow looming over me. I met people who uplifted me, who reminded me what it was like to be around those who didn't lie, cheat, or play mind games. Sure, there were moments when I would think about her, reflect on the life we had envisioned. But I was moving forward. I was letting go. I was finding my peace.